So today's topic is three questions you should be asking about suspicious files, and this is what we call file triage. We'll talk a little bit about Reversing Labs. Reversing Labs is a premier file reputation company. And so we spend our time all day looking at files going, this is a bad file, this is a good file, this file is suspicious, this file belongs to this malware family, this file has never been seen before. And so we have about 400 and I think 40 now billion files in our searchable threat repository. It's an actual searchable threat repository. It's not just on a bunch of tape drives in somebody's garage. We're about 8 times bigger than our nearest competitor as far as repositories. About 65, I think, security companies work with us, and we actually share files with them. So a lot of companies will actually send us all their suspicious files, and then we will use that to increase our knowledge of the threats that are going on. We analyze about 20 million files a day. We are able to analyze about 4,800 file types. And that's important because a lot of people say, oh, we can see, thousands of file types. And it's like, well, you can recognize what type of file type this is, but can you analyze it? And the answer is, well, no, I can't analyze it. I know it's a GIF file. And again, is this we're able to actually analyze 4,800 file types. And we can do 1 gig or bigger files, and we can deconstruct those in minutes. We can actually, with our Spectra Detect product, we can actually go up to 100 gig. So again, we are the leaders in file reputation, and this is what we have learned from talking with our customers about file triage. Next slide, please. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. We're going to talk about makes a file suspicious, and then we'll talk about how that comes out. Through three questions on file triage, what are the three questions you should be asking about every file? And the third thing, and I think the most important, is actually how you put it all together. How do you actually execute on this? How do you do this in your shop? How do you, make this work for you? Okay. So we're going to start obviously with what is a suspicious file? So let's just do a little quick pop quiz. According to the Verizon breach report, which all of you should be reading, how many data breaches involve ransomware? What's the percentage? Is it 5%, 22%, 44%, or 90%? And again, ransomware attacks are almost always purely economic attacks. Someone's extorting you, they're trying to get money from you, they're using this to raise funds for their organization if they're state-sponsored or hacktivists, or they're just straight-up criminals. And straight-up criminals is probably, I would say, 99% of it. What would you think, Aaron?
It's a pretty good amount, I would say. Probably vast majority.
Okay. So we'll go on to the next slide. And
There
the
we
answer
go.
is 44%. 44% of all breaches involve ransomware. And ransomware is one of the most disruptive of all the attacks because your operation goes offline. It becomes very visible. If people walk up to your ATM machines or your gas pumps or, try and go to your website online to book their vacation and they can't get in there because of ransomware, it's a very obvious, disruption of your organization. Becomes very, very public.
And
Next
good
slide.
job to most of y'all. Looks like most of y'all got that answer correct. So good job on keeping up with the reports.
Okay, good job. Okay. So why don't you talk about this, Aaron? Let's go through this a little bit.
Yeah, so kind of keeping in line with the idea of files for this this webinar, the topic in ransomware. Now, obviously, the earlier you catch this before it actually generates an impact, the better. And so the way we kind of classify ransomware attacks is we classify them in three different stages. You have your early, middle, and late stage. For our purposes, we're really interested in the early stage where the attacker is just getting into the environment, especially for ransomware attacks. Typically, these things will start out with your typical info stealer type malware, downloader malware that goes and gets additional stages. But I would say vast majority there's almost always going to be some type of file involved with that early stage. So the key here and the thing to note is that being able to identify these malicious files early on is going to be a really great way to lessen the impact of a potential ransomware event in your organization. So very, very key to note. And obviously, this is a big entry point for attackers, just because when you think about all of the potential sources of where files are going to be entering into your environment, so think your email systems, your users downloading files from the malware cloud storage, that sort of thing. Um, there's a lot of files that you have to kind of consider. So hopefully, at least we can kind of help shed some light on techniques that you can use, as well as just general ideas for helping kind of clear out the good from the bad files.
Thank you. So why don't you tell me what makes a file suspicious?
So there are typically several different either behaviors or maybe attributes that a file could be considered suspicious. These are just some of the typical things that we might see or we might just say about a file, especially when you're thinking about it from a SOC analyst perspective, right? So generally, I would hope at least most people are implementing some sort of reputational check when there are either alerts or if they're doing any type of investigations on files. So if you see a file and you have a no malicious reputation associated with that, yeah, that's going to be suspicious. So you might want to do some extra check there, or maybe activate your incident response plan if you have that level of concern there. So reputation checks are, obviously going to be one of them. Files that have high entropy or packed sections. So think about files that may be trying to obfuscate the actual code that's going on or running within those files or programs. A lot of times, malware authors will do this to avoid detection from various AV engines and whatnot. Um, so that can be a point of suspicion there. But we're talking about signed files. If, for example, you try and execute a file and maybe Windows pops up and says something like maybe this certificate is invalid, or maybe it's not even signed at all. Those are things that could be suspicious. There is a lot of malware out there that will try and evade detection by using invalid certificates or maybe stolen certificates, things of that nature. Another attribute would be metadata timestamps. So another evasion technique that malware authors may use is that maybe the compile time for that particular program differs from some of the other timestamps that are associated with that. So kind of keeping that in mind. If it another thing too is like if it's, for example, shows like it was signed like 100 years ago before, I don't know, 1920 before computers were made, maybe that's a sign that something's a little off there. Another pretty obvious one is going to be the extensions and MIME type mismatches. So, very, straightforward thing there. If somebody goes and creates an executable file, but then they just change the file extension to like PDF or something, just to kind of make that social engineering attempt or trickery essentially. So, obviously that's going to be another suspicious thing you want to check out is why are they doing that? And lastly, considering embedded macros or scripts in non-script files, so things like your spreadsheets and whatnot, those should always be raising some red flags there for additional investigation.
Yeah, I know for talking to our customers, it's really frustrating because the software will pop up and say, this file looks suspicious, and they'll submit it to another tool, and another tool will say something like, yes, this file is suspicious.
Yep,
And it's not really helping them because it's really all it's really doing is sort of confirming that, this rather than giving them a verdict or giving them some sort of additional information.
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So we talk about that. Well, why is dealing with suspicious files so difficult, right? This has been around for a long time. Obviously, this problem continues. Um, Again, with talking with our customers and surveys and engaging with them, they're saying that the main things are that sophisticated tactics, right? Things are getting worse, that there are new tactics available. AI is causing a lot of issues because they're, being able to generate these types of files and thousands of files, and we're seeing a lot more targeted malware, right? So rather than saying this is a blanket ransomware thing where they're just going to send it to everybody they can find on LinkedIn, It's actually a piece of very targeted malware that's targeted at Aaron Hoffman and knows a lot about you. It does a bunch of things to appeal to you, and it, knows your hobbies and is, appears to be from a friend of yours and might even have a very well-crafted email that sounds very reasonable. And AI is, instead of spending like 3 months doing that, AI can do that in seconds now, and it's becoming worse and worse. Again, psychological manipulation. This is again one of the biggest problems we have in security is people that click on everything, right? If you ever do red team, blue team type things, they always have the white team, which is like the executives or people that are in the, not on either side, and they'll always have like, this is Bob, and Bob is the executive, and Bob clicks on everything. So, that kind of thing. But again, what we find is that employees will be much more worried about getting in trouble than they are about opening malware, right? So if this says, this is from the boss, this is a really critical contract, this is a bill. If you don't pay this, your electricity is going to be shut off at the factory today. Attackers, play on the psychological manipulation. And the third, and I think we hear this more and more and more, is workflow disruption, right? You have a breach, you say, oh my God, now we're going to look at every file. Okay, we start looking at every file. You come in the morning and you have 1,700 incidents ready, from overnight, and there are new starting every morning, and you have to deal with that. And all these files are contracts for your, hotels. You have run a convention center, and people are sending you contracts, and they have to be processed right away. If you don't process them right away, they might choose another venue. So you're like, oh, yes, you must look at every file. It's really critical. Every file has to be examined. What do you mean I can't have my file immediately? We need this file right now. I need this file. We're gonna lose this account if I don't get this file. So again, a huge pressure on the SOC operators. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, Aaron, why don't you take us through this?
Yeah, so thinking about how you may have a existing approach to performing file triage, think about how difficult it is to go through and set up an actual environment to perform malware triage. If you're not using like an existing automated sandbox tooling or whatnot, you have to make sure you have the appropriate accurate environments that replicate your production environment or your existing environment. And that takes time and money, whether it's human hours of actually setting up and maintaining the underlying infrastructure and software to actually perform the analysis, and then actually going through and pulling apart the files itself. So that alone right there can be a kind of like a gate for a lot of teams, especially smaller teams that just either don't have the expertise or again the time or money to go through and actually fully analyze every single suspicious file that they're needing to comb through. So over on the right-hand side, we can see our little image of folks just digging through boxes of files labeled suspicious. So very good representation of what that may look like for some teams out there. So another thing to kind of take into consideration is that not all suspicious files are equal threats. So going back to the time and money spent on actually analyzing these suspicious files is that maybe you spend, an hour or two looking at a certain file, and then it turns out maybe it's just simple adware piece of junk that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to some type of crazy ransomware attack or anything like that. But all that time spent looking at that particular file could have been spent looking at an actual file that led to a more serious breach. So again, it kind of comes down to just the time complexity of all that involved in doing traditional malware analysis. But that being said, the basic approach typically involves starting simple in terms of just doing basic reputational lookups and then escalating as necessary into more hands-on file analysis when that comes up. But again, it all takes time and money at the end of the day.
And time and money are the drivers for these operations, right? No one ever comes to me and says, I have too much time and I have too much money.
Yep.
right? They're always trying to figure out how do I make my operation more efficient? And that's why we think about file triage. Again, if I saw this file a minute ago and I analyzed it and I know it's goodware and I see the same file again, do I really need to send that to the sandbox? Right? If I know this file is malware, I've seen it 1,000 times today. Why am I just not automatically processing this file rather than, treating it like it's a brand new file?
Yep, exactly.
Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to go through the 3 questions for file triage. So, well, I'll start off this off and then Aaron will take you through this. But again, the 3 questions you really want to ask yourself. Has anyone seen this file before? Have you seen it before? Has ReversingLabs seen it before? Are there repositories where people have seen it before? And what is known about this file is can you do any enrichment on this file to find out more about it? Where did it come from? When was it first seen? Does it have characteristics that are similar to other files? And then the third is actually what happens when I execute this file, right? If I've never known, so again, this is the idea that you want to, almost all files you should get rid of in the first question. Has anyone seen this file before? The second question, you should be getting rid of up to almost all the files. And then the third question, which happens when you send something to a sandbox or do further analysis, again, should be rare. You shouldn't have to send the files to every file to the sandbox. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Aaron, why don't you kick off?
Right, so let's go ahead and start with our first question of has anybody seen this file before? So like Stuart mentioned, this is going to cover, or it should hopefully cover the vast majority of the files that come through for triage, essentially, is that assuming you have access to a large repository like ReversingLabs, the basic idea here is that you just want to make sure you grab the file hash associated with each given file. You submit that to a reputation service, in this case, like our Spectrum Intelligence reputation API. And based off the classifications that you get back from that reputation, you kind of make a decision on how to move forward from there. So the real basic and obvious choices are if you have a file that's benign or what we consider goodware, you can go ahead and just close out that incident. It's not something that involves or requires additional time spent from your SOC analyst. They can move on to more important work. If the file is malicious, what we consider malware, you might want to perform some type of workflow that goes to remediate that issue, quarantining the file or even the endpoint to prevent any additional spread. And then lastly, if the file comes back as unknown, which can happen, there are a lot of scenarios, for example, like phishing documents that are highly targeted, that Stuart discussed earlier, using those advanced techniques that attackers are doing these days. You might have to move on to doing something slightly more in depth to get more understanding about that file and whether or not it's actually good or bad. So we're going to move on here. So something to point out is that we are integrated with all of the popular security operations platforms. These are just some of the big name logos that are out there that most of y'all are probably familiar with. Um, like I mentioned, we have our Spectra Intelligence API. That is a cloud-based REST API service. If you're not comfortable using a direct REST API client or any other solution, you can always use a platform like a SOAR platform, like your Cortex XSOARs, your Splunk SOARs to integrate or to work with that API specifically. So this is just one example of how the reputational workflow might look. So the screenshot you're seeing here, this is actually from Microsoft Sentinel. So I'm not specifically calling out Microsoft here or anything, but this is just kind of one example that you might see very similar across other platforms as well. We have an alert that came through in this case for an email that a user submitted for review. If you have seen those from Office 365, typically you'll get things like just the file name and the file hash. So looking at this right away for a SOC analyst, that's essentially useless to make any type of disposition on whether or not if this is a legitimate issue or not. So um, think about how your tier 1 or level 1 analysts are going through their typical workflows. This is probably one of those pain points that they may have because now they need to go and take that file hash and go to another third-party service and click around because unfortunately, as you know, the industry likes to say, single pane of glasses, those don't typically actually exist. So if you were to take that file and send that to a reputational service, such as the Spectre Intelligence file lookup, maybe using a SOAR platform, Microsoft Sentinel, of course, has SOAR capabilities built into it. This is additional context that you will get back. So we'll go through and cover specific fields in here, but the big thing that you can see straight away is that bright red. Status row there. So that right off the bat, at least the analysts can go and see, hey, red is bad. So we move on to the next step of our triage process. But so some of the fields that are involved in the reputation response that gets returned back in this case. So like I mentioned, you have your status showing the individual classification that's color coded. Very easy to quickly make a decision based off of that. But you get some more things in there, such as a description that will just provide. It's usually something that's kind of like very high level. This is how we came up with the classification, whether it's good or bad. We'll include like the threat name in this case. The file is Redline Stealer. Some other information that we'll include is a little bit more details on the file itself. For example, if it's a 32-bit or 64-bit file, what the actual file type is. Other information such as like imports for the file, and then maybe APIs that it accesses, such as like the checking for the individual device configuration in this case and running processes because this is an info stealer malware, so it's going to want to collect all the information it can about the system it's installed on. Another nice piece of information that we get is also scanner detection. So we do also take into consideration the various antivirus engines out there. So in this case, 23 of the 25 scanners did pick it up. And another nice workflow that you can use based off that is if you are using some of those engines, you can also look to see, did your EDR, did your antivirus consider this file malicious? And if everybody else is saying it's malicious, then you might need to go back and see what's going on with your specific vendor.
So,
So just some
Aaron,
points.
I have a quick question for you. Sorry.
Mhm.
When I submit that to the reputation, about how long does that take to come back?
Very quickly. So jumping right into that, uh, our bulk lookup time in this screenshot that we have here, this is using our Spectre Intelligence API. This is just a basic REST API client. I went through and submitted 93 hashes in this individual response. I didn't have an even number, unfortunately, just grabbed what I could with a quick copy and paste. But over in the top right-hand corner, that single response for 93 hashes came back in just barely over a second. So I was able to get some type of classification back for all those specific files. So very fast.
Oh, oh.
So some quick pros and cons just for doing the quick hash reputation lookup. As you can probably guess, is that the pros is that it is quite fast. You can't beat in just barely a second for doing over 93 files. You do get a quick good or bad. So you can kind of base that decision off like we saw earlier, where we had a nice bright red for malware. However, the only issues with this is that there are not as many details as to why this file is considered malicious. And then there may not be any additional indicators associated with just that quick reputation lookup. So if you want to be a little bit more proactive, like blocking maybe additional network indicators that may be associated with that malware, that would be a con of the hash reputation lookup. But we do have workflows to handle those particular cons. So one kind of feature for ReversingLabs and the Spectre Core product is that we have a proprietary hashing algorithm that we call RHA, or pretty straightforward ReversingLabs hashing algorithm. This was developed to kind of help ease the process of going through and dealing with a huge number of files and having to try and either triage all of them at once or do analysis of all of them at once. Basically, the idea is that rather than hashing the file based on the individual bits, so as you would know, most of the common algorithms out there like SHA-1, SHA-256, etc., those are going to generate a unique file hash per file. The way that RHA works is that it's looking at the file's features rather than the individual bits. And so essentially that kind of helps reduce the overall number of files that we need to be concerned about because generally, for example, like if you have certain malware families, they may change a couple things here and there, but some of the core functionality of any given malware is going to kind of persist across their various versions. And so that's where RHA comes in. And so RHA, is used, it has 4 different precision levels on determining whether or not a set of files are similar. And of course, they're all just 4 levels at 25, 50, 75, and 100%. So just an example of how RHA was validated. I forget when this was performed, but essentially how it worked is that we had started out with something like 7.75 million Zeus malware samples. Those files were run through the RHA hashing algorithm at the lowest precision of 25%. That resulted in about 475,000 unique RHA hashes, otherwise are resulting basically in 93% reduction of the overall unique malware samples in that case. So it's a pretty big reduction. Again, it's just another way that we kind of go through and help reduce the, I guess, the cost and the overall time spent with dealing with a large number of files.
Yeah, and this is actually becoming very critical with AI because we're seeing these software shops, they're making malware and then they're submitting it and then they're making a very slight change to the malware and resubmitting it again. And a lot of systems see that as a brand new file. And so therefore they're like, well, this is a different hash. I'm going to have to look at it again. We're going to have to go through the whole process again. And they're able to make these slight changes. Whereas with reversing labs hashing algorithm, we can look at this and say, okay, this part here is encrypted and I don't really know what it is. However, the rest of the file looks exactly like all this other malware that I've been seeing. Therefore, I would be very comfortable thinking that this is a new malware. And I don't know what the payload is. Maybe I just don't care at that point. Maybe I just want to mark this as bad and move on. So again, maybe I can later send it to a sandbox to try and figure out what it is if I really am that interested. But if I've got 65,000 files to look at today or a million files to look at today, maybe I just want to like know that this is probably malware, very, very high chance. And again, it has weird characteristics, like it has the ability to copy itself, it has the ability to make itself invisible or hidden. It has ability to make a replication of itself, or it has the ability to communicate out to the internet. And you're thinking, wow, this is a printer driver. It seems kind of weird for it to have all these characteristics. So again, reversing hashing algorithms proprietary to reversing labs, but it's a tremendous improvement over traditional hashing algorithms, which are just like, we're assuming that files didn't really change that much.
All right, so we're rolling into question number 2. So we had just discussed, has anybody seen this file? And now we're going to talk about what is known about this file. So similar to before, essentially what we are using here, or at least in this workflow, is that it involves the file analysis report API that we also have with Spectra Intelligence. Same thing again, where you take the file hash and submit that to the API. But what you're going to get back with this, rather than just a simple, good or bad classification, is that you get a little bit more information about the file itself. For example, some maybe hard-coded indicators or strings that might be embedded in the file. But that being said, if you need maybe additional behavioral context, for example, maybe if there is a specific piece of malware that requires interaction, maybe it's got some sandbox evasion techniques or capabilities baked into it. Maybe that's where you need to move on to question number 3, which we'll talk about in a moment. But that being said, Now that you have a little bit more information with the file analysis report API, you can go and do different actions like blocking some of the indicators that have been pulled out, and then going through and closing out your security incident that you're looking at. So this is another screenshot example. Had to kind of crop it way down. This is from Splunk SOAR. But this is one example of calling our analysis report API. And so this is all just coming from basic static analysis. In this case, this particular sample had a number of strings that look like they might be URLs or domain names. And one in particular that stuck out in this was that .store domain. So definitely looks like something sketchy. This is another screenshot from Microsoft Defender XDR, I believe is what they're calling it now. So lots of different name change there. But this is basically an extension of that previous enrichment example that I showed earlier. So in addition to having a nice classification of malicious and bright red, you're also going to see the things like your interesting strings, as well as a breakdown of the associated minor attack TTP. So this is very handy for going through and looking, just getting a high level overview of maybe what techniques we're seeing with this file or what this file is attempting to do. And another nice idea is that you can go and take this and say, hey, do we have do our detection mechanisms properly capture these techniques? So this is a really great way to go through, look and see, okay, not only are we handling this particular malware for this case, now we can go be proactive and verify that, okay, our detection systems can properly alert on these techniques.
So Aaron, just so I'm clear, if I'm enriching this and I'm getting more information about it, I can then look at that and say, this is an interesting string, this website. I can then like talk to my firewall person and say, hey, is somebody is someone going to this site? Or, are there systems within my organization that are sending traffic out to this site? Maybe I want to block this URL and then and then redirect people so that I can see who is actually doing this. Maybe there are other people that are infected I don't even know about.
Exactly. So it's going from just looking at that particular file and now considering other factors that may be in play here. So not just your file entities, but now you're talking about network entities like your URLs and going out and actually handling that and making sure that they either, like you said, get blocked or we can check and see, okay, have we seen previous hits for that traffic to this URL or domain, that sort of thing. So great way to go and expand on just slogging through all the alerts and incidents in the queue.
If I'm using a SOAR or something, I could automate a lot of this, right? I could actually say if this file come back and it's malicious and it has this string value that's a URL, then create an incident and send it to the firewall person, or even automate the firewall activity depending on how many files I'm having to deal with.
Exactly. So very highly recommended going through and yeah, automating that entire process. Also would highly recommend making sure you have a tiered approach to doing that. So making sure you're not just jumping right into automation and blocking things,
Yeah,
freehand off the bat. But starting off, going through having human interaction and verifying that, yes, the automation works to properly block things. Like, for example, maybe you don't necessarily want to block all of duckdns.org in this example. But maybe your organization does care about logging duck DNS. So,
yeah, or
yeah,
maybe at least turn on logging, right? Maybe
yep,
say, show me how many of my endpoints are going out to this website. If I find out none of them are, that's great. If I find out all of them are, then I'm going to be, put the coffee on, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So just like before, just showing an example of just how fast this is. So before we showed off just the basic reputation API that was TCA 0101. For our file analysis report API, that is TCA 0104. Same thing, I use the same 93 hashes that I used in the first lookup, and now calling the report endpoint, which is going to generate a little bit more information. But even that, just under 3 seconds to return all that information back for 93 different file hashes. And obviously, necessarily, that doesn't mean every single file hash has a associated report, but again, that's still pretty quick if you're just wanting to look up a large number of file hashes at once. All right, so we're going to move into our last question here for dealing with suspicious files is what happens if we actually run the file? And so, like before, everything was just a basic kind of passive method of going through and checking to see if a file is truly malicious or if it's something that is benign. But not all files and not all malware could potentially be identifiable just using those passive methods. A lot of them will use some type of evasion techniques, or they may have something built in just to get to be prevented. So, like anti-analysis techniques, for example. Um, and then some files just may be set up in such a way that they require some type of human interaction to proceed. So, seen a lot of phishing files and stuff like that, that where they may attempt to look like a legitimate document that comes through, but maybe has an embedded URL or like a button inside the actual file itself that would take you to the actual credential stealing page. And that's where dynamic analysis comes into play. And so there are two components to this now. Our traditional automatic dynamic analysis that'll go through and execute the file in a sandbox environment. It'll go through and pull out all the different behavioral indicators associated with that when the file is executed. So that's a really good way for basic binaries that could be run, maybe suspicious executables and whatnot. But one thing that we definitely do want to highlight on this call is our new interactive sandbox. Some of y'all may have seen other services that offer interactive sandboxes, but we also have that now, and it's a really nice feature. So within this workflow, of course, after you get that file submitted through our dynamic analysis service, you're going to get a lot more potentially useful behavioral indicators of compromise. And then maybe you want to go through, like we discussed before, do something with them, like hint, block those indicators, and you will profit at the end of that, at the end of the day, by blocking the bad guys from getting into your environment. So that's the basic workflow there.
Yeah, so I just want to, can we stay there just a second? So I want to just make sure we're talking about the right thing. So we are absolutely, thank you, Aaron, for a great job. So there's two things we're looking at here, right? One is to get a verdict, and a verdict to us is the most important thing, right? This is a good file, this is a bad file. You have received 1,000 files attached to emails today. You examine all 1,000 of them, and you get verdicts on almost all of them using file reputation or enrichment. But there are, we believe, normally about 15 files out of 1,000 that need to go to a sandbox to get a verdict. So again, if I am trying to get a verdict on these files, it's a goodware, it's malware. I need to send up only about 15 out of 1,000, which contrasts with a lot of our competitors because they'll say every file has to go to the sandbox, or 30% of the files need to go to the sandbox, or hundreds and hundreds of files need to go to the sandbox, but don't worry, our sandbox is really fast. We think that you do need to send some files to the sandbox, but only like as a last resort, because sandboxing is typically the most expensive and the most resource intensive part of any operation. Now, there are a lot of reasons to send files to sandboxes after you've gotten them. Like, so you've seen a new type of malware, it has weird behavior. You have a researchers who want to look at it. The question is anybody really going to do anything about it, right? And that's one of the challenges I see in a lot of organizations. They say, oh, we're going to send all these files to the sandbox. We're going to gather all this information. It's going to go into a great file, and then we don't have the resources to do anything about it. So again, a lot of this is to try and figure out realistically how many resources do you have and what are people going to do about it, and how can I dramatically reduce the amount of work that my team has to do in order to free up more resources to do real work, right? So I really do want to send a file to a sandbox to gather information to see if it's doing a registry change that I might want to go through then and check to see the rest of my organization to see if all my endpoints have this new registry entry, which means they've been infected. Or, there are other types of things. But to actually get a verdict, you should be sending very, very few files to a sandbox. Oh, thank you, Aaron.
Yep, absolutely. And that's a really great point because this does take a little bit more time than just doing basic reputational lookup. So gotta make sure you're sending stuff that you really need to make sure you send over to dynamic analysis. So just gonna walk through just a basic preview of the new interactive analysis feature. So this is currently available, I believe, as of Spectra Analyze 9.4, but don't hold me to that. It is still in a preview state. So if there are any existing RL customers that are on the call, this is what you can expect to see. For anybody who is looking for an interactive sandbox, again, just another preview of this. So. When you submit a file, in this case, this is the file submission form for Spectra Analyze or Malware Analysis Appliance. This is the form that you'll get when you go to submit for dynamic analysis. You have a little toggle switch that will enable the interactive analysis, and you can also select your platform for analysis. I believe right now we currently support Windows. I believe there's work in play for Mac OS and Linux. So this is the window for interactive analysis. So what that would look like inside the Spectra Analyze appliance. Pretty straightforward. If you've seen any other types of interactive sandbox, you'll have a little window for where you can go and interact with the virtual environment with the file for analysis. And then after the analysis is done, you'll get a nice summary report. You'll get the basic things like screenshots during the analysis session. You can download the good stuff like your PCAPs for all the network traffic that occurred during that session. The dropped files that may have appeared. And of course, you get all your other behavioral information, like Stuart mentioned. You can look for things like registry keys that may have been modified or created, stuff like that within the analysis summary. All right, so we're going to go ahead and put all of those together. There we go. And Stuart, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so again, based on our experience, if you have about 1,000 files, you should be able to uncover. And again, you want getting a verdict, which is malware or goodware. The reputation will sort about 90% of those. And so again, having a huge file repository and being able to see if we've seen this file before, we should be able to pull off about 90% of that, and that should happen in well less than a second. And so being able to do static analysis, it again about 10% of the files, maybe 9%, about 90 files. And again, that's where you need enrichment. You need other things that are going to help you understand things about this file that will be enable you to get a verdict of malware or goodware. And then you should be able to get about 99% of your files eliminated. And at that point, you need a few files that are left that you cannot get a verdict on for whatever reason, never been seen before, new obfuscation techniques, other types of things that make it really suspicious. And those are there's going to be a few percentage of the file, like maybe 1%. So you're going to have about maybe 10 files. You're going to submit those to the sandbox. That's going to take a couple minutes to go through, and then you should be done. So again, you should be able to process about 1,000 files every 5 minutes. And again, depending on your getting the verdict, and then you'll be able to tie that with automation. If it's you'll quarantine these files as best practice, and then you'll submit it to the system. Within a few seconds, you'll be able to release 90% of them as goodware, or you'll know that they're malware and you'll mark them for removal. And you'll notify the user, you received malware. Please pay attention. You'll submit the rest of the files to static analysis. That'll take a couple more seconds, and then those files can be resolved. And then you submit these to the sandbox, and you'll get a verdict at that point, and then you can decide what you want to do about those files. Some people like to look at them after the sandbox analysis. Some people are just like, well, I've got a million files to look at today. I just need to go ahead and mark these as good or bad and get going. So again, the idea here is you want to reduce the number of files that you're looking at, and make it faster, cleaner, easier, and cheaper. And again, file reputation is by far the cheapest way to deal with anything, or least expensive. Static analysis requires a little bit more, and then sandbox is your most expensive way of dealing with things. So again, the least number of files I can send to a sandbox and still have 100% operation and be able to do this is just as good. And we've done testing and we've done situations where we said, okay, let's take 1,000 of these files and send them all to the sandbox. And will I get any different result? And 99.9% of the time, we get exactly the same result. So again, we're not saying, this is not any worse than sending everything to a sandbox. It's just that a lot of vendors sell sandboxes and that they say, you should send every file to the sandbox. And if you're not, you're a bad operator or you're a bad person. We don't find that to be true at all. And that, again, file reputations. And if you saw this file a minute ago and you know it's malware, do you really have to send it to a sandbox again? It's identical to 9,900 files that you saw all day. Do I really need to, I know it's a good file. Do I really need to do anything with it? You know, so again, at this point, I've examined the files, I've sent them through, and I have 100% coverage. So what this means, again, if you are always make the joke about how you can tell SOC operators because the control and the C and the V are worn off their keyboards, right? Again, if you're doing this manually, if it pops up and says, here's that file hash. If you're going and cutting and pasting that file hash and submitting it to some browser URL or something else, you can do that. It'll work. It works fine, but it takes forever. So again, depending on how long it takes for a file to come back, if you have 1,000 files, again, you're talking about, start to finish about 32 hours. With ReversingLabs, start to finish, which means these files come in, you have brand new incidents created, you've gone through, analyzed them, you've received a verdict, you've done your automation to either quarantine, release the file from quarantine, or go ahead and delete the file. You've updated all the incident reports, and you're ready to start again. Less than 15 minutes. So again, everything done for you. And if you're dealing with thousands and thousands of files today, every day, or you were hoping that you could deal with thousands and thousands of files every day, but you can't because you just don't have the resources, we think that file triage is a much, much better way to organize your SOC and your operation. Any comments on this, Aaron?
Now, I was just gonna say the point about the Control C and V keys being worn out on the your keyboard as a SOC analyst. I definitely very much remember at least my time working as an analyst in a SOC and having to flip through the various platforms that are out there and copying and pasting a bunch of file hashes. After the first dozen times, you get really tired of it. So
Yeah.
even not even thinking about the time saving aspect of it, think also about your the human experience from your SOC analyst of having to go through and manually try and look up a bunch of files all at once. It's just real soul sucking, I would say. So yeah, definitely make sure you're automating that process for them.
Yeah, I don't think anybody goes, "Oh, how do you describe your work?" Well, it's soul sucking. It's like,
Yep.
yeah, okay. But again, it's a challenging role, right? I mean, I've had, my one of my first tech job was tech support, and the number of people that are like, uh, just calling about the same thing every day. Where do I get the latest drivers? Well, I'm older, so he's like, oh, you get them from our bulletin board. Well, what's the phone number of the bulletin board? Well, let me tell you. It was, it was in the answer that the menu that you went through, but I'll go ahead and read it to you. And so, yeah, you're doing that kind of job every day and you're spending all your time on that. It just becomes very tiring, especially if you know that this could be automated. A lot of it could be handled better, and a lot of the things that we do, I know that you work on a lot of the product, work on a lot of the integrations. And a lot of it is just like even like color coding it. Like, okay, what are we going to do? Well, if it's bad, we're going to make it red. Well, that's actually incredibly useful. Because if I looked at 1,000 of these today or 10,000 of these today, the fact that it pops up in this green and I have 100% confidence in it, well, then, again, I can just move forward. I don't have to, I can read this again and I'll do a lot of stuff with it. But if no one's ever going to look at it and nothing's ever going to be done about it, I don't, I just need to get all these incidents closed before I go home.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Moving on. So we have some additional resources here. Again, we have a white paper that talks about this. We also have white papers talking about modern malware analysis. We have some additional technical webinars that we have done on YARA rules and indicators and things that you might find interesting. But again, if you have any questions at this point, please put them into the chat. And if there's anything that we can help you with, and and again, please check out the resource tab for these links. Hmm.
And yeah, if you do have any questions, make sure you use the Zoom Q&A portion. Be happy to answer any questions for you while we got 7 minutes left in the allotted time here.
Mhm. I think we have a couple of questions that were sent in. One of the questions, Aaron, is asking about like polymorphic malware, like where you have new types of malware coming out all the time. How does this something like this be able to address that, or what, is that something that's a real problem?
Yeah, and so like we discussed earlier, threat actors are always making use of advanced techniques. I forget there was a recent malware family that actually was using polymorphic techniques. I can't think of the name at the moment, but essentially how we go around doing that. If you all remember how we discussed the reversing labs hashing algorithm or RHA. That's kind of how we overcome that. So, you think about that massive file repository that we have, like 400 billion plus files that's growing every day. That RHA algorithm is helping us kind of comb through that massive data set, being able to go through and identify the similarities of those files. And so, even though polymorphic malware, there may be unique components to that given file. There are generally going to be some type of similarity between certain files. And so being able to refer that to other files that we have seen in the past based on those functional similarities, that's kind of how we're able to come across or at least overcome that question about the polymorphic malware is being able to identify it based on its constituent components, as they say.
Thank you. Are we seeing more polymorphic malware or?
I don't think we've seen a massive rise in the use there, more so than previous years. It's still around for sure, but I think definitely from what we're seeing now, maybe less of the polymorphic components, but like a lot more, like you discussed, threat actors are starting to explore some of the AI generated stuff, seeing how that kind of impacts their operations. To summarize that question, I don't see we're necessarily seeing a massive rise in polymorphic malware, but that is still a concern out there.
Okay. And then one other question that came in was about AI and the AI used in the SOC. Are we seeing more AI being used in the SOC? Or, I mean, there are some companies that are coming out and saying, I have a SOC in a box as an AI driven thing. I mean, it hasn't really seemed to, I mean, it's just new on the market. But have you seen a lot of, I mean, I know a lot of people are talking about using AI. Look, I mean, we have integrations into to the various chat GTP and other things. But a lot of times we just use it for like lookups, right? Like if, tell me more about this, malware and using it as more as a research thing. But how do you think AI is going to really play in the SOC operator world?
Yeah, so at least based on from what I'm seeing, there are a lot of teams out there that are at least in the initial stages of exploring how they can best utilize AI, generative AI, at least in this case. Um, there's always the question of is AI going to be able to replace a SOC or at least some of the like lower level SOC type roles? And I don't necessarily see that at this time. I see it being a force multiplier for some of those lower level roles that are doing like we discussed, the real slog work of digging through the queue, going through and doing that. Basically enhancing that overall time to triage the alerts that are coming through. But another really great way that's coming through and being used from what I've seen is doing things like making very complex information digestible for like low level SOC analysts. So, for example, one use case I've seen is, you know, think about some of the file analysis reports that we also showed on this webinar, just some of like the very high level stuff. There's a lot more to those file analysis reports, but having an LLM go through and essentially summarize those file analysis reports is a really great use case, at least in my opinion. Just basically going through and making it, putting it in a format that's, straightforward for like a basic analyst who may not necessarily be either the most technical or maybe they just don't have enough experience with the types of data that come back in that case. So, but yeah, so hopefully that kind of answers the question. But yeah, that could all change in next year. It's a very fast moving field. So
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, again, the SOC operations that we see to be the most successful are the ones where they're really investing in training and really investing in educating their use. I bring in somebody as a tier one. My expectation is by next year they're a tier two, right? Or, I need to, I can't have just a bunch of tier ones and then have them quit in boredom after 6 months and things like that. I mean, again, I mean, one of the nicest thing I ever saw was Microsoft was automating password resets, right? The number, working in a tech support group and having people call you and say, "I forgot my password," that's very boring. I mean, I've had that job. It's very boring. And if I could just automate this, and also it's better from a security point of view because you can't be bullied, right? Hey, I'm a vice president. I'm really important. You better reset my password right now. No, I'm not going to give you my information. You better do this or you're going to get fired. That kind of thing. We see a lot of times people trying to use that to get into organizations and steal passwords and steal accounts and things like that. If I can automate that where it's not, I can't let it be bullied, right? Or I can have it pull in more information quickly. And so hey, you're using a phone line, but it turns out it's a VoP line and it's licensed to a company through Yemen that's actually contracted through a company in Malta. It's like, yeah, I'm not gonna, we're gonna go ahead and hang up now.
yep,
So again, a lot of this is around, to me, what is we talk a lot about AI, right? I want it to do all the dumb stuff that I hate doing. Like you said, generating a report at the end of the day of all the things that I've done. If I could just have that ready to go and ready to send with a few minor edits, that'd be great, right? And let's free up my time to do the things that I find really interesting. The stuff, learning about new malware, learning about new techniques, what hackers are doing, all the stuff that I find really interesting. That would be great. So yeah, if I just offload all the dumb stuff.
exactly.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's about it. I think, we've had most of you stayed for the entire session, so that's really good. We look at that. I really want to thank all of you for attending. If you have questions, you can please send them to me on email, stuart.phillips@reversinglabs.com or aaron.hoffman@reversinglabs.com. We're quite happy. Again, a lot of people have questions that they don't want to put in a public chat or want to have discussions about different things that they find interesting. Please reach out to us on email. Again, if you want to friend us on LinkedIn, we'd be more than happy to, chat with you afterwards or about anything. But I really want to appreciate the time. I know everybody's super busy. And again, thank you so much for attending.
Indeed. Thank you all. Hope you all have a great Thursday.